Hello everyone and welcome back to Inside ArtScroll. Today we are joined by a special guest, the voice of Jewish radio, Nachum Segal. How are you?
A pleasure. Nice to be here.
Nice to be here. I hope that introduction is okay.
That introduction was fine, yeah.
I'm trying to channel my inner Nachum Segal. You know.
I always wonder about people who are introduced with there's no need for an introduction. Or, everybody here knows him. Like, is that a compliment? Is he being cheated out of a good introduction? I'm not so sure. But yours was definitely fine.
But I must have missed the memo about the no tie.
I don't know. I found out, I discovered that the ArtScroll atmosphere is a relatively casual one. At least
is that right?
At least in the ArtScroll studios. So I figured I'd go with that and show up tireless.
Well, we're happy to have you here.
Thank you.
And I'd like to start with ArtScroll and your connection to ArtScroll. You've been speaking about and promoting ArtScroll for many years. You're an avid ArtScroll fan. Talk about that and specifically how ArtScroll has impacted you.
It's funny you say this because a couple of nights ago I was actually thinking about this. And aside from the fact that Rabbi Sherman and I are both Newark, New Jersey boys, so there's that connection. And Rabbi Sherman, of course, has been instrumental in the growth of ArtScroll over all these decades. I remember as a kid, not that it's such a dramatic story, but I think it's a poignant one. When I was a kid, my older brother was the rabbi of a local nursing home. And he would take me every Erev Pesach to the nursing home to run the Seder with him. And he, of course, was the rabbi, and I was the kid who was supposed to sing all the songs. And that's what I did. Well, my older brother, who is no longer with us, unfortunately, was really a quintessential older brother when it came to certain things. And he always made sure to take care of us in a variety of ways. And every time I would go with him to this nursing home, each year, he would purchase for me as a gift a new Haggadah. And the first time it happened, there was a specific Haggadah that everybody was talking about, and I wanted it, and of course he got it. And then I remember the second year I did it with him, there was the brand new Haggadah from ArtScroll. And that was the one that, again, everybody was talking about and was making an impact out there already.
Was that Rabbi Elias's Haggadah?
I believe so, yes. And he purchased it for me as a gift for coming along, to do the Erev Pesach Seder with him. And I just remember that. I remember that as a kid that there was a significant ArtScroll publication that for me was important. That for me, I actually, considered what would I want, and that was the gift. So an early memory of ArtScroll as a little kid.
Over the years, obviously, you've watched ArtScroll grow and seen the tremendous expansion of Torah. And on your show, you've interviewed many people, you've promoted many projects. Any particular ArtScroll project that to you was so groundbreaking and so transformative, and you were kind of the conduit to bring the news of that project to the public?
Yeah, I think the one that I remember the most that fits into what you're asking is the ArtScroll Siddur. It was revolutionary, not only that there was a new Siddur, we had been used to so many other ones that had dominated the shelves in the synagogues for so many years. When the ArtScroll Siddur came out, there were a lot of innovations, a lot of interesting commentary, and in general, it was a discussion that I felt the entire Jewish community could have. There were Sfarim that only a certain segment of the community could appreciate, and people who were learned enough to explore certain things. And there were other things, biographies and others, that were appealing to a specific crowd or someone with a specific type of background. The Siddur comes out, and all of a sudden there's an ArtScroll presentation, an ArtScroll product that is completely absorbed by Jews across the board, of every religious stripe, of every background. And I remember the discussion on the air, I believe it was with Rabbi Sherman, when the Siddur came out. There was such enthusiasm and so much curiosity about what was and wasn't included in the Siddur, and what is in fact different about it, and who they turned to for comments on each part of the Siddur. And it was a very, how do I put it? It was one of those items, one of those topics in the Jewish community that was really, really hot at the time. And I think that that my show, and in general the ability and and the fact that I was able to bring someone on to discuss it, really opened up the discussion even further and gave people an opportunity to get answers to questions that were curiosities for them. And and I think in general, discussions like that help propel it to become the natural next sitter in most synagogues. And that, I think, is a good example of that.
Yeah, no question. You've been an integral part of bringing the ArtScroll message to the masses, basically. And ArtScroll definitely considers you a dear friend.
Well, I appreciate that, and the people at ArtScroll have been great friends. And there have been different points in my career where ArtScroll really has been a driving force behind some of the things we do. There was a time when, on a regular basis, we would bring in authors to discuss their work and how the book got to be the final product that it is, and that it became. And the interesting thing to me about the experience of interviewing ArtScroll people and its authors about their products, the interesting thing to me is always the more, I don't want to use the word obscure because I don't know if that's fair, but books that if not for ArtScroll, they never would have been published. Whether it's books of photographs of certain things or biographies that we would not be familiar with the subject of the biography without them. When those come out and we have the ability to sit and discuss the procedure and the process that went into making those, that to me is very fascinating and interesting. There are a lot of publishers that over the years have explored and have gone ahead with their own Talmud, with their own Chumash. Not to say ArtScroll doesn't have its uniqueness in those areas, we know it does. But I think that when it comes to some of the novels, some of the biographies, some of the special projects, those are the ones that are really fascinating to analyze.
Well, you have an appreciation for history, which I think allows you to really delve into these type of topics and appreciate the broad treatment that they've been given by ArtScroll. But speaking of history, take us back and our viewers to your history. You referenced Newark, growing up there like Rabbi Sherman did.
Yeah.
You were the son of the rabbi, Rabbi Zev Segal. Talk about your younger years and how you were impacted by being brought up in that milieu.
Well, I think there's 2 points to this. The first is that even as a little kid, they claim, and some people actually say that they have recordings of this, that I always wanted to have a microphone in front of me. There was always, whatever excuse I had to make announcements or even give my own news or sports report, I went ahead and did it even as a little kid. So there's always that radio track, and I've always given credit to my mother, frankly. I've discussed this openly. When I went to college, she said to me, there's a radio station there at Yeshiva University. I think it's something you would enjoy. That was the quote. I think it's something you would enjoy. So the insightful intuition of a mother certainly helped propel me. Maybe I would have discovered the radio station on my own. I don't know, but certainly helped propel me to something that I ended up loving. So there was always that radio aspect. And as a kid, was in love with radio, frankly. Loved listening to it, analyzing it, loved sports broadcaster on radio. The old traditional transistor radio under the pillow, that was me. The other aspect is I grew up in a house where both my parents were very, very community-minded. And when it came to my mother, she was the Rebbitzin of the community and took that role very seriously. I remember when she was officially the chaplain of the sisterhood. She was the Rebbitzin. And I remember the diligence that she undertook and the time that she took to prepare the invocation for the next sisterhood meeting. She took every little aspect, and of course the larger aspects of the job, of that responsibility as the Rebbitzin of the community very seriously. My father was an internationally known figure who had a tremendous impact on both the American rabbinate and the American Jewish community. We talk about the Kiruv movement today. This was something that he was involved with in the first part of the 20th century. We talk about Jewish camping and how important it is in the education of our children. It's something he was involved with in his 20s in this country. And then, of course, he made a tremendous impact in Israel. He was one of the few people who were religious leaders, who was fluent in both Hebrew and English, and knew many of the players from pre-state Palestine, and was counted on and turned to by many, including Hasidic Rebbes and non-Orthodox leaders, who needed him to intervene on their behalf or to bring a cause to the fore and to be involved. Most people are familiar with his relationship with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, which was quite extensive. The Satmar Rebbe was somebody that he actually went on missions for and delivered messages for to members of the Israeli government. So I think the whole community-minded aspect of being in a family like that, when I go into radio, there are a lot of things I could have pursued. Obviously, the Shabbos situation doesn't allow for a lot of it, if I did want to pursue news, sports, or something like that. But I always felt that, with the background that I had, the natural thing was to do something that would be appreciated by people in the Jewish community.
Now, growing up in Newark, you referenced your older brother, Olav Shalom.
Right.
Many people know your brother, Rabbi Chaim Nachum Segal. Was it just 3?
No, I'm the 5th of 6 children.
Oh, okay.
The 3rd of 4 boys. And some of us, you talk about Rabbi Segal and others in the family have worked also on behalf of what people would consider the klal, on behalf of the Jewish public and the Jewish community in many different capacities. And even when I was in YU doing a simple college radio show, and there was a story about how I gravitated toward doing a Jewish show, but I ended up doing a Jewish music show in Yeshiva University. And even there, I felt that to make things as fun as possible and as inspiring as possible with the music and guests, even for the few people relatively who were listening, it was a small college campus radio station, I felt that was important. And really, when I went to WFMU, my first stop in the JM and the AM scene, when I went there, I sort of took that entire model of good, fun college Jewish radio with all the serious aspects of Jewish news and things that are important, Torah, Israel, etc., and I brought it to the broader public. And some of that still goes on today after 37 years. There's still a free-flowing radio presentation that a lot of people do consider fun, but there's a lot of inspiration, a lot of Torah, a lot of Zionism, a lot of news that's important to the Jewish community, a lot of calls to action. We have an audience that's very, very active, so if we ask them or suggest to them that senators and congressmen have to be spoken to or written to on certain issues, they hop on and do so. And frankly, we have an active audience. We make a recommendation that the latest biography from ArtScroll is something that will really enhance their Shabbos table or really enhance their family's experience in general. It's something that they're going to take very seriously and usually listen to.
I'm hearing from you that it's not just about the entertainment part of it. There's a holy endeavor there.
Yeah.
It's about bringing a message and motivating people, guiding people.
Yeah.
You have a very diverse audience from people who are from birth, others who maybe were introduced to Judaism later on.
Or through the show, frankly.
Or through the show.
Right.
Any specific stories?
People are shocked about that. And I used to say this years ago, I would say it very often, that for some people, and I know this from listeners, for some people, the Friday morning JM and the AM, right, name of the show, JM and the AM, Jewish Moments in the Morning, the Friday morning JM and the AM was their Shabbos. And they would say this to me, that they had no connection, but the music we were playing and the discussions we were having about the Shabbos, we have Parsha Shavua every single week. Rabbi Yudin's on every week, giving Parsha Shavua. Right. So this was their Shabbos. They got their Shabbos sermon. They got their Shabbos Zmirus. They're listening to all the music. It may not qualify for an actual observance of Shabbos, but imagine that you're giving somebody a Shabbos with a Friday morning radio show. So yeah, and I'll tell you a couple other things that I think you'll find interesting. There are a couple of small, nuanced acts, segments that we introduced over the years to the show that have become, in my opinion, very important subconsciously to the Jewish listener who's tuned in. For instance, every morning at 7 a.m., we play the Galei Tzahal News from Israel. Now, the majority of people in my audience are not, especially the ones outside of Israel, are not familiar with Hebrew, and certainly not enough to listen to a newscast. It is 4 or 5 minutes of radio, pretty valuable radio time. So why is Nachum Segal doing this? And I'm doing it for one reason. Because when they hear that newscast, they're going to remember when they were in a cab or on a bus in Israel. It's going to take them to remember, it's going to give them the ability to remember and reminisce in their own minds about what's going on in Israel. And it's possible that they'll actually even tune in and to the news in a little bit of a deeper fashion and understand what the situation right now is in Israel. Somebody now during COVID who's hearing a news report, they may pick up on what the latest is with the COVID cabinet and with the restrictions that are going on there. So that's all done just to transport people, as radio has the ability to do, to transport listeners to Israel for that moment. It's the reason why every weather forecast that I give, and it's one of the most important things to wake up and tell people what to expect outside, every single time I announce the weather, before I wrap up the weather forecast by telling people what the current temperature is in New York, I will tell them what the temperature is in Yerushalayim. Because what's more important to us than what's going on in Yerushalayim? Even the weather. Yeah. So I think those attitudes, those subliminal and sometimes direct additions to a show like mine are really key and important in getting the listener to focus on what I think is an important thing to focus on.
Now, music is a major, major part of your program.
The basic staple of the show.
In fact, when I was growing up, and my mother would drive us to school, and we would always hear Rabbi Goldwasser's Divrei Chizuk at 7:30.
Right.
And I heard of JM and AM. I grew up thinking it was Jewish music in the morning.
Well, it was at a time.
Sure. Was music always a major, major component? Going back to your college days when you were introduced to Jewish radio, was it always a major part of your program and the other things came later supplementing what the music provided?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that from the beginning, Jewish music has been the basic staple of the show. It's what holds the show together. I don't think radio people realize that, especially as the week goes on, how important music is in the Jewish world and in the Jewish mind, frankly. There are people who can make it through their day if they don't hear Jewish music on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. As Thursday and Friday and Shabbos begins to get into everyone's head, it is very common that people who don't dominate their entertainment or their casual listening with Jewish music, all of a sudden they're going to turn on a Kumsitz, they're going to turn on some Erev Shabbos selections, they're going to have some Shlomo Carlebach music going. That's the way it is. I know from my own kids that the Jewish music was much more prevalent in the latter part of the week than the beginning part of the week. So music is a really important part. It's not just there programmatically to keep the show flowing and together. It's there because Jewish music has a tremendous positive effect on people. And we know the type of negative effect media can have, radio, TV, internet, media can have on anybody. So imagine if there's something positive out there, really good positive messages in both Hebrew and English that are being transmitted musically, how important that is for everyone's development. So music's always been important, but from the very beginning, even in my old college days, I always felt that there's too much happening in the Jewish world to ignore. There are too many people that need to be introduced to the Jewish public. So that part of our programming till today is really vital, really important. So Jewish organizations and government officials who want to address the Jewish community and Jewish music stars that people like to hear from and other role models and heroes in the Jewish world, whether they be in Israel, the United States, or anywhere around the world, are always going to be a very important part of the programming.
What year was it that you made that transition from college radio, kind of just feeling your way through your introduction to radio, and then take the plunge to go to WFMU, which was listener-sponsored radio, which is also very unique,
right? Kind
of an innovation.
Oh, yeah.
Talk about that transition. What period of time was that?
Well, that was 1983, 2 years after I started college radio. They desperately, and it wasn't known as JMAM at that point, but they up at Yeshiva University, some of the administrators got a phone call. Is there anybody there that could possibly take over this Jewish show? We're going to lose it. Nobody wants to do it. It's going to die out. Is there anybody who could do it? The person on the other end of the phone up at Yeshiva University and I were very, very close, really my mentor, and said, I'll have someone for you in 20 minutes. And they were like, what? And sure enough, that day, which was Erev Rosh Hashanah, 1983, by the end of the day, I was hired, so to speak, showed up at the radio station the next morning, Erev Rosh Hashanah, that Wednesday morning, and it was actually on the air for the last half of the show that morning. Yeah. And I've been on every morning ever since. We stayed at WFMU until the end of 2016, then used JM&M to establish our own independent network, Nachum Segal Network. And It's funny you ask about the transition from college radio, because some people would argue I'm still doing a college radio show. And in some ways, frankly, the way things went this morning, they may be right. So a lot of that element is still there, but obviously in terms of the professionalism and incorporating a lot more serious discussions, that's changed over the years.
But your voice and your personality have become synonymous with Jewish culture over the last 40 years, I would say.
I hope so.
And you've also watched the growth and expansion of the Jewish music industry, which I'll touch on just for a moment. Mordechai Ben David, Avram Fried. You were there in 1983. Those are the early 80s. That's when they really were coming out on the scene, late 70s, early 80s. Talk about watching the explosion of the Jewish music industry, which you were kind of on the sidelines reporting it as it was growing. Now, obviously, the world has exploded. The Frum community has exploded. Talk about watching that from the sidelines and being the reporter, so to speak.
It's interesting because, first of all, it's a numbers game out there, as you know. I mean, in the world of publishing, it's also a numbers game. And there was a certain limit, I guess we could say, of people who had an interest in Jewish music, 50s, 60s, 70s, etc. As the Jewish community grew and as the world became smaller, because, I mean, I'm referring more to the internet era, but even before that, it did condense somewhat in terms of activity between Israel and the United States and other parts of the world. As the world became smaller, all of a sudden there was a greater international interest, right? So concerts that were few and far between in this country all of a sudden started getting, not only were there more concerts here and live presentations, but all of a sudden other countries were bringing in performers from different places to do their own local events. So that I think is a good way to describe the concert scene. In terms of the interest in Jewish music, number one, I think we were helped tremendously by general media. I think that parents and children alike, maybe older children, realized that as much as general media had some things that to offer that may be okay or maybe parv, the majority of what they were offering was not for a good Jewish family, or not for one that had strong family values, let's put it that way. So I think that both generations, parents and children, made an attempt to incorporate more of the Jewish music into their lives. A lot more became available, right? There were more artists and more performers, a lot more became available. And I think there was one other element which I'll take great pride in. You mentioned in your question about having a sideline view of all this, which of course I did as I'm watching everything grow and more performers come onto the scene. But there was a wonderful woman, Mrs. Newman, who was the principal of Bruriah High School. And she once said to me, she said, we were talking about the show, and she took tremendous pride in the growth of the show, especially vis-a-vis Jewish education and Israel. She felt the show had tremendous influence in those two areas. You mentioned listening to it in a carpool. It became a show that was, that everybody could listen to in a carpool, especially as news stations started reporting stuff that you didn't want your kids necessarily to be waking up to on a daily basis. And she said, what you did, she says in reference to me, what you did is one thing. You made it cool for high school students to listen to Jewish music. Now, if that's the case, that because either I was young or had the personality that you're alluding to, or just was caught in a wave of tremendous Jewish music that was coming out at the time, that was really starting to influence Jewish families, whatever it is, I take great pride in that the show had a lot to do with showing people that Jewish music is not just for grandfathers and grandmothers anymore, and it's not just 70 and 80-year-olds who are enjoying the altar music from the old days, but it's people who are fascinated by the contemporary selections and who want to hear and want to be inspired by what's being offered now. And I think that was a big piece of what JM and the AM and all of our efforts ended up accomplishing.
Most people know that you're a Jewish music aficionado or something of that
Yeah,
sort.
I don't know if I'd say that.
But many people don't know, which I didn't know till recently, that you're a long-time chazan. You've been a chazan for the Yom Ne'Ram for
37 years.
37
This
years.
year was quite a challenge.
I heard about it.
Very large facility.
With COVID, and you relocated. But that's interesting because not only are you interested in music, but you're a performer, so to speak. And I'm sure you've incorporated a lot of the music you've heard into davening for them. And just take a moment to talk about that role in your life, which is totally separate from being a broadcaster and a radio personality and an announcer at musical events and things like that. It's a whole different role.
Yeah, it is a different role and a much more serious role, frankly. And thank God I'm in a shul where they really appreciate a shliach tzibor who can elevate them. Like they want to be elevated. They want the experience of the high holidays to be one that's enriching. That's why, frankly, so many people came to shul, thank God, this year, when a lot of people, in many communities, felt that it was safer to stay away. But people, fought through that, and they came to shul. But I think that whole aspect of being a shliach tzibur and somebody who can, thank God, enhance the tefillah and the Am Narayim is really the byproduct of being a shul family. I always say that half the time I go to shul is because I watched my father with 105 fever and 10 feet of snow go to shul no matter what. So I always say that half the time I go is only because I saw and grew up with the dedication that one must have to shul. And even if we are not as strong in other aspects of Jewish life, and I would like to hope that we are, but one thing I can say about our family now, the one that I lead with my wife, is that we're very, very serious about shul. In fact, I have a rule that my kids call the football rule, which is, if you would sit at a football game in this weather, you are going to shul. And unfortunately for my boys, they will sit in 10 inches of snow at a football game. So
they're going to shul.
The football rule always works against them, right? So, that's a joke, of course, but I'm proud to be a father of sons and daughters who are always in shul and understand the importance of it, and hopefully they're going to give that to their children. So I think this whole aspect of being a shliach tzibor really starts with just being enveloped by the synagogue. I love the synagogue, and growing up, I loved leading services, whether it was from Ein Kolokenu, or then eventually as a bar mitzvah, Kabbalah, Shabbos, and Musaf, and I love doing it. So yes, I am a chazan, as you put it, or a shliach tzibor at a very important time of the year, but it is so enjoyable for me. And such an incredible feeling that the only thing I don't like about the Yom Narayim is that Slichas is at 12 midnight. That's other than that, I love that one night of the year where I'd rather go to sleep than head out to Staten Island for Slichas is the one night I complain. Other than that, Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, honestly, are my favorite days of the year.
Now, it's interesting. Over the years, your morning radio show was very early, 6 to 9
and
every day. Still is. And that surely affected your daily schedule, number one. And number two, getting up that early, I don't know about you, but my voice doesn't start till around 10, 11. I remember working on a musical project about 20 years ago, and I was in a studio, and one of the other fellows there who was singing, he told me he went to a voice teacher who trained some very, very well-known secular singers. Right. And those singers would not open their mouth till midday. You couldn't get any. And when he shared with this voice teacher that in synagogues and shuls, Orthodox Jewish men are getting up and doing sheikhinat at 8:30 on the top of the lungs. The guy couldn't believe it. It goes against every grain of what he trains his students to do. So talk about both of those things. Waking up very early in the morning as it affects your family schedule, and also getting your voice going so early in the morning when most people are not interested in talking.
Yeah. On the first part, by the way, there are now guests of mine who've made a very good move to alleviate this problem. Eitan Katz was on the air this week. He just moved to Yerushalayim. And he says to me, now, when I'm on your show, it could be 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't have to go and try to sing at 7 o'clock in the morning in your studio. So there are people with creative answers to this and creative solutions. The early morning thing, it's funny because I would say it goes based on eras. The early era, when I was still, finishing my teenage years and in my 20s, it was very common for me to oversleep and panic to set in and try to get to the show, in a reasonable amount of time. And both my mother, of blessed memory, could have told you those stories, and now my wife, she should live and be well, could certainly tell you plenty of those stories of the panic that sets in when it's 6:20 in the morning, and I'm supposed to have been in the radio station already 20 minutes earlier or even earlier than that. So the early morning hours are a challenge, and it's sometimes funny to refer to 10 a.m. as lunchtime. And often when people complain, like when my kids complain about getting up at 6:30 in the morning, I remind them that my alarm now goes off at 3:59, which is, so that I always win. I can always win that contest of the, who's upset about getting up earlier in the morning. I always win that one. But it's those who don't know it, those who are, night people, or those who really have difficulties in the morning, don't realize how incredible those early morning hours are. How my voice sounds the way it does at 6 a.m., I don't know. I really don't know. And there are mornings that, it is a challenge.
Do you have a routine, a coffee, a tea?
I mean, I'll drink
lozenges.
I'll drink something.
Oh, you'll drink something.
I'll drink something, and but even on fast days, it seems like, thank God, I'm able to present and where my voice often really has where things really take a toll on my voice. When I'm in an arena, if I'm in a concert hall, often I'll find, and by the way, I feel myself doing it now, frankly, to an extent. If I'm overusing my voice, projecting too much, shouting more than I should, and not really taking advantage of the microphone, like I forget sometimes that I'm wearing a microphone, then I start to feel that the voice is going a little bit.
Have you taken voice training at all over the years?
It's funny. In YU, I actually took a voice training with a legendary expert, and honestly, I was never. There are a couple of things I did chop, and there are a couple of things that I've been able to implement, especially being a chazan, that I was able to implement. But the majority of the breathing exercises and that whole routine, which I wish I would have been taught as a teenager, because you just get things.
Get used to it.
You get used to it,
doing things a certain way, right?
And I never really chopped all of that, but there are a couple of aspects from those lessons and from that and from those courses that have stuck with me over the years. I also there are a couple of subtle things that people don't realize are very, very helpful. That really speak to somebody who's a radio announcer. For instance, I was taught, again, almost by accident, but there's nothing. We don't consider anything an accident. I had a speech teacher in YU, because there was no radio department at YU, but I had a speech teacher in YU who actually gave a specialty elective in radio. And honestly, now that I look back, she wasn't an expert in radio, but there were a couple of things that she taught us that were so valuable to us. One of them is how to read while you're still saying words from a previous sentence. So whenever, and I mean this I practiced and did incorporate for the last almost 4 decades. When I'm saying something on the air, the likelihood is that as I'm saying it, I am reading something else. And boy, does it help a presentation, and boy, does it help a presentation go smoothly, to flow better.
You're already preparing for the next thing that you're going
it's all
to
happening
say.
in a split second.
Right.
But literally, as you're hearing me say what I'm saying, I am looking at and previewing the next sentence. Very valuable, by the way, on stage, especially when you write, not to give away all the secrets, but when you're writing last-minute notes backstage, because you were just told that this guy's coming out. Right. And so if you have that practice down pat, so you can go to those scribbly notes while you're still speaking on stage and making that announcement, and process it in time for it to seem like it's really, flowing well, let's put it that way.
One of my favorite segments on your show that you've done over the years is the top song of all time.
Very much in demand.
AB's V'Yerushalayim Ercha is the perennial winner, right? Talk about that experience, and talk about your own personal musical favorites, songs that when you hear just open up tug at the heartstrings, open up your feelings. Talk about that, the music you connect to.
Okay, so we'll stick with Vekas, only because I don't want to get into trouble with any contemporary artists. So, but
you can't go wrong with AB anyway.
You can't go wrong, and if you want an instant kumsitz, put on Vekas too, and you have an instant kumsitz in your house. It's like my kids now with Eitan Katz live in Yerushalayim. You want to be at a concert, put on the thing, and start getting dressed for Shabbos.
Right.
So, I mean, I don't know if I would actually discuss favorites. I mean, there are a lot of songs that are, like you say, touch the heart and are meaningful. What was the first part of your question? There was I wanted to answer.
I was asking regarding the not a contest, but the idea of people voting for their favorite song.
Right. So one thing I'll tell you is that when you're the one running the contest, there's no chicanery going on, but there are strong suggestions going on. For instance, we did one of our Yerushalayim contests, and I essentially said for about 5 weeks that Yerushalayim Shel Zahav cannot be embarrassed by not winning this contest, and my listeners were kind enough to actually make sure it pushed through.
They helped you out.
Exactly. I think in subsequent years, AB's Yerushalayim made it, but the first time we did it, I said, come on. Any of us who grew up in a Jewish home, no matter what our background, we have no choice but to vote for that one. But look, the thing about the contest and the thing about these, music countdowns is that it's all, again, about taking something that's, helping to inspire people and helping to, and making it fun.
That's exactly it.
And, people get focused on it, and it drives up the ratings, and people want to hear the countdown. And, it's why radio stations have Thanksgiving weekend countdowns or Memorial Day weekend countdowns. It's all, we want to see where our favorite songs end up. It's funny you're mentioning this because we're actually just now talking about something we may introduce next week to do a quick type of countdown with another network that's counting down songs. So this is always on the table. It's always something that we're considering. But in radio, stunts are very important. And all these stunts, I believe, just increase the awareness of what we do and increase the awareness of the things we promote. And frankly, as opposed to a lot of other media sources, we're promoting stuff that's really good for the Jewish people.
Which leads me to the next question. We know that you play a lot of the new music, but every once in a while you'll throw in a vintage song, an old Miami, an old reggae song, and sometimes you think to yourself, where did that come from? So how do you determine what you're playing at any given time? Is there a seder to it, or is it just arbitrary?
Well, it's funny because someone once said, whatever mood I'm in, that's the mood the Jewish community wakes up in. So, assuming that's true, sometimes...
Well, we always wake up to the Regesh
Right,
Maidani by Shmuel Brazil. That's an untouchable.
Which the overwhelming majority of people are happy we start with that song. It may not be their favorite Modani, but obviously the words, make up for it. And for some people, it's really a tremendous way to wake up. I would say that I lost my train of thought. What was I would say that so whatever mood I'm in, if I am literally in the mood to hear an oldie, or to take something off the back shelf that hasn't been on for a while, I'm going to do it. And I can't describe why the mood overcomes me like that. Maybe there's an upcoming Yontif or words from Megillah that we're about to read or something that triggers it. But sometimes I like taking advantage of the fact that I can do whatever I want, and in a free-form manner, everything fits in. Everything's part of the format. So that's how that works in sometimes.
Now, one of my favorite parts of the show also, and I'm sure many others, is when you do an interview. You're a master interviewer. And I want to talk about that. It's a little ironic we're doing an interview.
Sure.
I'm a little intimidated
We're
here.
interviewing about interviewing.
I'm a little intimidated, but what in your mind makes a good interview? What makes the interviewer good? You said you studied radio, television, how people do interviews. What makes a good interviewer and what makes a good interviewee?
Well, I think there are different good interviewers and good interviewees. I think that if you get that shidduch, if you're sitting with someone who's who connects well, who has good chemistry with a guest, then, it's a big home run. You're not always going to have a home run, no matter how good the interviewer and or interviewee are. I think when it comes to interviewer, from my perspective, it's about curiosity. You need to have a level of curiosity that's usually somewhat off the charts. And I say it like that because there's a level of curiosity that human beings in general have. But to get to that next step, to delve even further, to ask someone a further question, I think is really important. When a listener says to me, I was thinking of that question and you asked it, that tells me that I was in tune with those who had the same curiosity that I had. Listening is very important, really important. The only way to do a really good interview is to listen to every single word the guest is saying, which is challenging sometimes when you're distracted by anything going on in the studio, on the computer or the equipment or anything else. Sometimes the clock itself, as you're looking at the clock and knowing this has to end soon, it can be distracting. Sure. Also, I think sometimes less is more. People who think that a 35-minute interview is better than a 25-minute interview usually have 10 minutes worth of why on earth did I do that?
Are you hinting something here?
No, not at all. This is fine.
But interesting, Miriam Wallach, your manager, and your machatenis.
Correct.
Which everyone has.
Machatenis are first.
When we spoke before your interview, she told me, Nachum loves to do interviews knowing nothing. The less you know about the person, the more, I guess, natural the questions come and the more the curiosity comes.
I mean, I think knowing her and she probably put it a drop differently. The way I would say it is, it doesn't bother me to know a lot about the person. Okay. That doesn't bother me. In fact, I've gotten to a point where in the old days I did not read guests' books, and now I read guests' books because I'm in a different space when it comes to how I interview, and now it's better for me to have that information. But what I will say, and I think what she meant, is that I want zero communication, either in person or even on video, with a guest before that interview starts. It's got to be a blank page. I know why you're here. I know you're here to promote this or to discuss this or to announce this or to analyze this. I know why you're here. But I don't want to know anything further about what you think of all this. I've read that you went to college here and you've been here and you have a family. There's a way these days to research easily. But when it comes to you walking into my studio, you are a blank sheet of paper.
She did tell me that today.
There you go.
When we sit down, if Nachum ignores you,
correct,
before the mics go on, don't take it personally.
Correct. And by the way, that's a practical piece of advice also, because she knows that if I don't have those instructions, or if you don't have those instructions, I will start to schmooze, and the best part of the interview will be done before the interview's on the air.
Right,
so it's just a good practical piece of advice.
That is definitely a practical thing.
But I have to add one thing, if I may.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know what our time constraints
are.
Yeah,
we're good.
You asked about what makes a good interviewer, and I will never forget the great interviewer who some of you out there in ArtScroll land may have heard of, others may not. You could Google it. Larry King used to say the following. They asked him a question. What is the difference between you and Ted Koppel? Now, just to give perspective for those who are not from that generation, Larry King was a sit-down, 1 hour, ask anything I want, I believe never really read the guest books, if I'm not mistaken, type of interviewer. Ted Koppel was an investigative journalist, wants the hard facts, and I'm going to ask you the uncomfortable questions until you answer them type of person. So they said to Larry King, what's the difference between you and Ted Koppel? You're both interviewing people on a nightly basis, and at that time they were dominating television. And he said, let's say there's a fire, right? A building is burning down. There's a fire. So Ted Koppel would run over to the fire chief who's standing outside the building supervising this rescue effort and would say, how'd the fire start? Is it under control? I would walk over to the fireman, Larry King says, and say, what made you want to become a fireman? And I think that the combination of those two, sometimes I'm more Larry King, sometimes I'm more Ted Koppel, but the Larry King method is much more endearing and usually is, for our purposes, meaning that with the format of my show the way it is usually the type of approach that's better for my audience.
But you also want your guests to feel comfortable enough that they don't feel like you're going to ambush them with a question that's going to make them feel uncomfortable or caught off guard.
Correct.
So there's a balance there between investigative.
Right. Well, there's a lot of methods that one can use to do that. A lot of methods.
Manipulation.
I would never ask this question, but somebody suggested that maybe you. Like there's ways to do that, but we try not to be too underhanded.
Is there any particular interview that you remember from over the years that stands out to you?
Look, I've answered that question before, and there are a variety of answers that I've given in terms of top interviews and responses that I've gotten. But I think today, especially, for those who are watching this, I think they realize we're in the middle still, although hopefully toward the end of this whole COVID-19 challenge. I think one of the biggest challenges of this era for American jury has been our physical separation from the land and state of Israel. To me, I haven't been there since January. I get it. I'm a big shot. I get to go a couple of times a year, and I'm not taking that for granted. I know there are plenty of people who haven't been there in 20 years, and I feel for them as well. But it's hard. It's difficult knowing that we cannot just do what we normally do, and that is basically pick up whenever we want, go to Israel for the length of time we want, and come back. And I think that physical separation has been very difficult. With that in mind, the interviews and the experience that we have every summer until this one of doing a radio show from the Nefesh B'Nefesh plane where we literally set up a studio in business class of the charter flight. And we bring people from all over the plane who have interesting stories. A farmer, remember, Nefesh B'Nefesh is attracting people from 30, 35 states every trip. It's not just New Yorkers with our typical background. And, you hear about these people who are now going to be serving as lone soldiers in the Israeli army. People who are dropping everything and have decided, I've got to get with my family to Israel now. Or I've made the decision that if I don't move now, my kids are going to get too old, I won't be able to easily make this, or as easily make this move later on. Or anybody out there, rabbis who have made aliyah, Jewish music personalities, my own staff members. We were on the plane when my own staff member made aliyah from Baltimore to Beit Shemesh, which was amazing. So we've done this every summer. And to me, the only way to answer that question now in the era that we're in is those shows. Because, number one, it's exciting to do a show from a plane. But number two, the reaction that we get, that we are accompanying people on the ultimate mission of ours, which is to move, for the entire Jewish people, to move to Israel, knowing that the future of the Jewish people is in the state of Israel. Now in 2020, that has to be my answer.
How about doing a show, think back to over the past 40 years, probably the most life-changing event was 9/11.
Right.
How about doing the show on the 12th? Because the 9/11 attacks happened after your show ended that
Correct.
day.
Well, yeah, right, during and after, right.
And
actually, the during part was we didn't know what was going on.
You didn't know what was going on.
And I was working at a radio station where the window looked at the World Trade Center. So, and the bookkeeper from the radio station calls me and she says to me, "Are you looking out the window? Do you know what's going on?" And sure enough, afterwards I go to our parking lot and I'm standing with 1,000 other people watching the second plane hit and everything. But the point is, 9/11 was a really delicate situation for a million reasons, but for me was not as serious or historic as one might think. Mm-hmm. Because it's one of the only times, one of the few times that I can recall in my career where it was obvious, based on reaction and anecdotes, that most people were not listening to me that morning. The entire world, and certainly anybody in the New York, New Jersey area, were all tuned into the news stations. We're all concerned with what was going on and what the instructions were, how New York and New Jersey are going to work now for the next 48 hours, 72 hours, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, what's closed. Remember, they closed all the bridges and tunnels. So there was a lot of practical information that, that needed to be shared. And people were tuned into, rightfully so, the news.
But did you feel compelled to kind of the next day and the week after, as people were still recovering? And I'm thinking back also to the Persian Gulf War and different trying times. Did you feel that you have to tailor your programming and the music specifically to the times?
No question about it. In fact, you have to remember that, and by the way, just in reference to 9/11 for a second, it was the first show I ever did that started with Tehillim. It was the first show that together this is how we're going to start the broadcast. But it's funny because if one remembers that era, and I'm sure you remember, there were so many terror attacks in Israel, so many bus bombings, so many shootings, drive-by shootings, stabbings, etc. So many episodes that we were always, we as a radio show and we as a community, were always looking to the news from Israel in that era. 9/11 happens, obviously, traumatic. You mentioned the Persian Gulf War. Of course, all our shows are tailored to that, to whatever is affecting. Even now, when election season, many of our shows are tailored to what everyone's talking about in the United States. But what I remember about 9/11 is that at 9 o'clock on the 12th, which was a Wednesday, so I remember specifically who was on the air, the person on the air after me, remember it was a Jewish show till 9 a.m. and then it was a regular free-form secular show. The person on the air after me walks into the studio and says to me, "Tell me what to do. You've done a million of these memorial shows, meeting, because a million of these disaster shows where, you have to reflect the mood and the collective Jewish pain of the Jewish heart, the collective Jewish heart that's feeling all this. What advice can you give me? I'm about to do my first, America was just attacked. I'm going to do my first tragedy show." And I said to myself, wow, the irony. There were people that looked at what happened at the World Trade Center, and a small part, but part of what we were thinking was, okay, the people in the United States are now going to understand what the people in Israel are going through on a regular basis. But this guy was opening my eyes up to the fact so much of our programming has to do with tragedies that are going on in the Jewish world. And that's something I
So
learned
true.
from the 9/11 experience.
We don't need an introduction to that.
Not at all, unfortunately.
Many people know you besides for your voice on radio. You become an announcer of sorts at different events. What
Right.
was the first event where you were utilized in that capacity, and were you prepared for that? Because you were always behind the mic without people seeing you, and suddenly you're announcing at musical events and things of that sort. Talk about that part of your career.
It's funny because, and this I will credit Maish Rosenbaum. I'm sure you guys here know him very well from Akoba Sefer Judaica in Woodburn. He was producing a Diaspora Yeshiva Band final appearance concert tour on December 4th and December 11th, 1983, first at Queens College and then at Brooklyn College, with Yerachmiel Begun Miami Boys Choir and a bunch of other acts. This was the farewell tour. Some might say first of many, but the truth is that since then we've had reunions of Diaspora, but this was the real farewell. And I'm sitting with a friend of mine, and we'll give him credit as well, as Rabbi Azriel Sif, in a pizza shop on the Lower East Side of Manhattan where I was visiting. I was not a resident then of the Lower East Side like I am today. And we were sitting there, and Maish Rosenbaum was in this pizza shop, and Azriel says to him, "Hey, this guy, Nachum Segal here, just started a radio show," which I just started at WFMU a month or two before, on Erev Rosh Hashanah. And, why don't you use him as an MC for your concert? What actually prompted Maish to sign off and let me be the MC of that concert, I have no idea. But I found myself in Queens College and Brooklyn College at the age of 20, announcing what was to me the most significant event in the history of Jewish music, because I am the biggest and certainly the tallest diaspora fan out there. And I'll never forget that night in Brooklyn College. They had done an amazing set to wrap it up. Uvoa Ovdim from Kalbach that went on for like 15 minutes. And a kid who today I guess is a full-fledged adult, comes over to me backstage with a program from that night's event. And he has all 6 members of Diaspora's autographs on that playbill. And he says to me, "Would you autograph this for me?" And I said to him, "You don't want me ruining that."
Wow.
20-year-old, new on the scene. And I'll never forget that. That was, I don't know what I would say today, frankly, but
You've done many shows since then.
I have signed an autograph or two as well.
Has there been any memorable or not such memorable gaffe or mistake or error that you think back and kind of wish that you could have done it again?
I emceed an event where the electricity went out. Big challenge. I emceed an event where someone had a heart attack in the audience. And, essentially that event came to an end because of that. But, that was a very sensitive situation. I was at a Haas concert where generally, frankly, we don't like I'll say collective we, it is a lot me, but I think there are many others involved that would agree. We don't like that stage turning into a happy birthday to this one stage and messages for this one stage, unless absolutely necessary or appropriate. So anytime we're asked to make an announcement backstage by somebody and we're asked to go out there and mention this, whatever it might be, there's always a lot of vetting and hesitation. But a police captain was backstage, plainclothes police captain at the Haas concert one year, and says, "You must announce that this gentleman is missing, and if it was somebody with special needs, and if anybody sees this person on the way out of the concert, or anywhere in the vicinity." Now, not to be too cynical, but I'm like, is this announcement really going to make a difference? We're in the middle of Lincoln Center. He could be anywhere now in Manhattan at this point, having run away. I make the announcement, which, obviously was the right thing to do. And minutes later, I'm informed that a couple gets to their car and sees a stranger sitting in their car after the concert. And having heard the announcement about this individual, instead of calling the police right away, it said, called Hatzalah, and because they wanted to deal, it's a community situation, maybe they could deal with it without the police getting involved, etc. Called Hatzalah, and of course Hatzalah called the police or whoever had to be, and they handled it, and of course it was that person, and till this day, this member of the NYPD says, I facilitated saving this person. Whatever I did or didn't do, the answer is that, yes, a lot of interesting things happen behind the scenes.
But you're still not a big fan of the happy birthday shout.
No,
right?
I mean, there are times I'll make an exception and understand why an exception has to be made, but I do feel that certain stages have to remain as dignified as possible, and that the audience appreciates it when you keep it that way.
Now, when you get up to announce in Lincoln Center or these big venues, do you get nervous anymore, or you kind of past that?
First of all, I get nervous every morning. Now, it's not, butterflies in the stomach nervous, but every time the mic goes on, I am, some may say excited, some may say pumped, use whatever word you want. I call it nervous. I always tell my kids if I wasn't nervous, I'd be nervous. Backstage, the aforementioned Miriam Wallach can certainly attest to this. My wife Stacy would spend an entire day just telling you about this experience of what it's like for me before a stage performance. Yes, I was nervous on the way here, frankly, and expressed that this was but usually after the first sentence or two is when things settle down. My first announcement, things settle down. But I always tell people, and I say this about public speaking in general. I've said this to school kids who are pursuing, to hone their skills in public speaking. If I wasn't nervous, I'd be nervous. If you're not at all concerned, if you're not at all, hyped up because of what you're about to experience, I would be nervous.
That's a problem.
I think so.
Right.
I think so. I'm not sure I'm 100% right. So different personalities, and not everything works for me and works for everybody else. But I think that's something to think about.
Now, after almost 40 years, you clearly have not lost your passion. You're still enjoying it, because you're saying you get pumped up for your show.
Most shows
Some people would say you've done it for so long, it's kind of repetitive, but you're still finding a fresh appeal to what you do.
Right. There are challenging mornings where I would rather not be in the studio, but those are, thank God, few and far between. The old never worked a day in my life, and I get that. I enjoy everything I do. I don't know how I could possibly be doing anything else. And the fact that, now that the audience is international and that, just the global reach, you say something and there could be, a few thousand people listening to it that moment, and knowing that, by the end of the day, another few thousand or tens of thousands or hundreds of, depending on what the topic is, are going to hear it and be inspired by it or incorporate it into their lives or pass it on to a friend. And one of the greatest feelings is when people ask for links to certain shows or to certain interviews because they want to distribute it to their entire WhatsApp list or email list. And that's amazing.
But now that you're off radio and fully online, is there a practical difference in how you do your show or preparation or execution?
That's a good question. I would say that there definitely is, not all of it consciously, but the fact that I know that it's an international audience and that now equally people in New York and New Jersey are trying to understand my references just like equally the rest of the world is trying to understand it. That definitely is a consideration. There are things I'll translate or make sure people understand. If I introduce an organization years ago, I would never have to tell my audience. I could tell people what the name of the organization is and their subtitle, and that would be enough. Now I might have to explain more, the impact that they're having and what they're doing in a specific part of the Jewish world. So yeah, there's definitely adjustments that have to be made.
Now, as we wrap it up, I want to ask you a final thing. You referenced living on the Lower East Side. You have the schus to live near the Paisik Hadar of David Feinstein.
Same building.
Same building. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Talk about that.
I see all the time when you guys come to visit. Don't worry.
Well, talk about that experience of living on the Lower East Side. Many people don't know that there still is a Lower East Side.
Right.
They know it from Rabbi Shmuel Kunda's tapes.
Right.
They didn't know it still exists. There are still people living there.
Still a pickle store.
Talk about that experience
look,
and the fact that you haven't moved from there.
The reality is that I'm a rookie on the Lower East Side. I'm only there 31 years. And honestly, if you ask anybody if I'm a Lower East Sider, they'll, Bakoshi allow me to maybe say that because I haven't been there for 60, 70 years and my family was not living there before I was. In fact, my wife is a real Lower East Sider, has lived there every day of her life. But it's a very nice community. It's nice to be in Manhattan and still be in a section of the community that's more, it's a drop more quieter. You got to be careful to live on the FDR Drive. That's this thing is real quiet. The other thing that's funny is that you mentioned Rav David Feinstein, who of course is incredible and has such a positive influence on so many families in the community. I will also give a shout out to Rebbetzin Feinstein, who has also been very kind with both her words and actions to everybody on the Lower East Side. And whenever she gives us or my wife an opportunity to get involved in a project or to just be a part of a committee, it's something that is very meaningful. But my funniest story about all this is that years ago they published a story in one of the downtown newspapers about Jewish Lower East Side. And it said that among the well-known residents of the Lower East Side, of yesteryear and of today, among the well-known residents are the Torah giant Rabbi Moshe Feinstein, the Yiddish actress Lillian Lux, and radio announcer Nachum Segal. To which I responded, this is the only time where you will see the names Rabbi Moshe Feinstein and Nachum Segal in the same sentence.
Well, we want to thank you. Thanks for coming down.
Pleasure.
Thank you for sharing your memories of your youth, your experiences in your industry, in which you become iconic. And we want to bench you with many more years of using your voice and your influence to inspire, uplift, and bring Jews closer to their heritage.
I appreciate that very much. And everybody here at ArtScroll should continue doing so many wonderful things on behalf of the global Jewish community.
Thank you.
Pleasure.